The market has been flooded with handhelds this year. Aya Neo is a company notorious for contributing to that influx. But I want to give them some credit. At least what they're doing is interesting. They mostly focus on PC handhelds, and their PC handhelds are usually just a little bit too expensive to justify. They've recently expanded into the Android market, and the story is similar there too. I made a video a few weeks back on the AYANEO Pocket Micro, a Game Boy Micro clone. It was hiding some pretty beefy hardware inside, and I kind of liked it. I haven't touched it since that review, but I remember enjoying what I played of it. That cost me around $300, which is on the higher end as far as emulation handhelds go. But at the same time that that was announced, this was announced, and I was more interested in this. This is the Aya Neo Pocket DMG. It's a very similar situation. It's an Android-based clone console with a similar UI, but I love this form factor. I'm much more of a DMG guy. It's also way more powerful, and with a screen as big as this, you can do some serious gaming on here. I was very excited to rip this out of the box and try it out. Then I was immediately ripped back down to reality by some frustrating issues during the setup process, and a reminder that I paid $500 for this thing. For an Android device that looks like a Game Boy. But then I was pleasantly surprised by its capabilities. It's hugely powerful, especially for a device that looks like a Game Boy. I guess it better be powerful. It's $500. This video is sponsored by Factor. Welcome to Very, Very, Very Good Smoothies. How can I help you today? Yeah, let me get a caprese salad. Sure. Would you like chicken, steak, or a free-range baby duckling named Dewey? The chicken? Okay, great. That's a note of the duck! That's a note of the duck, over. I'll get that started for you. Okay, thank you. And here's your salad. Why did you blend it? Sir, this is called Very, Very, Very Good Smoothies. What, were you gonna chew it with your teeth or something? That's gonna be $45. Here you go. So it's gonna ask you a quick question. The pay's not very, very good here, so please. Factor's fresh, never frozen meals are ready in just 2 minutes, so all you have to do is heat and enjoy. Skip the grocery store prep work and cooking fatigue. Instead, get chef-curated, dietitian-approved meals delivered right to your door. And they've got smoothies, they've got juices, and they've got wellness shots. You can pop it in the microwave if you're in a real hurry. I like to make it in the oven. It cooks in just 7 minutes. It's still very fast. I legitimately forget to eat sometimes, so having Factor in the fridge ready to go has been great for me. And you can try it for yourself by going to factor75.com and use code 50. You hungry? I don't know why they changed the code on me. To get 50% off of your first Factor box and free shipping on that first Factor box. Also, if it's a salad, why is it red? Oh, did you want the chicken? Is Dewey okay? Oh, Dewey's fine. I don't know why it's red. What do you want me to know everything? It's been a long time since I've received a review unit from Aya Neo, probably because I'm not usually very favorable to them. The thing that gets me about their devices is usually the price, and also there's usually some clunkiness in their UI, which has gotten better over the years. But that's why I'm a little late to reviewing this, because I had to buy it. I literally just got it. I actually don't mind buying it myself, because then there's no embargo date. I don't have to work with the company. And I actually get to review the buying process, which sometimes is a pain in the ass with devices like this. But there are some downsides to buying it myself. For example, I had to spend $500 of my own money. Don't love that, never love that. That's why we love Factor here. Use code 50hungry. But also that means I get it way later than other YouTubers. Luckily, you guys are willing to watch these videos a little bit late. So that's fine. It's not a big deal. Aya Neo always launches their products on Indiegogo. They always crowdfund them first. I don't love that. I think that if a company believed in their product enough, they would put their own money forward. They wouldn't rely on you to risk your money on their product. Also, crowdfunding takes time, and by the time the crowdfunding's done and it gets into people's hands, the hype is lost. Also, sometimes the only way to get these products is to crowdfund them. Sometimes they don't put them on their site after it's been crowdfunded. Sometimes the only way to get it is to pre-order it. Also, there's early bird pricing. I don't know what happened. I ended up paying around $500 for this thing. I'm going to be saying that a lot because that is a lot of money. It's the one with 512 gigabytes of storage, 16 gigabytes of RAM. It has a Snapdragon G3X Gen 2 in it, which is the same processor that's in their Pocket S, and I think it's very similar to what's in the AYANEO 2 line of handhelds. So it's a premium Android handheld that you'll be paying a premium price for. I just checked, the Pocket S is $700 right now. Jesus Christ. The looks are what sold me. I'm a sucker for the DMG design. DMG stands for a dot matrix game, which is a reference to the original DMG Game Boy that had a dot matrix display. Obviously, this display is not a dot matrix display, but the rest is obviously reminiscent of a Game Boy. The D-pad is big and awesome. The D-pad and the buttons feel like membranes, but they have a good press to them. I don't love that the thumbstick sticks out. It is a hall sensing stick if you were worried about drift for some reason. The range on the thumbstick is actually pretty solid. It feels really accurate and responsive, which is a nice departure from some other DMG styled single thumbstick handhelds. This little cutout here is actually a trackpad. I'm not sure why an Android device needs a trackpad, but it does moonlight as a second thumbstick. It's actually not a terrible replacement for a right stick. You'd think it'd be a little less intuitive than it is, but it actually works pretty well. Of course, it's not a one-to-one replacement, so not all games work well with it. I wish devices like this would utilize the 3DS style circle pads more. I don't love that the thumbstick sticks out. You have a bunch of buttons on the side that I never press because they're not as intuitive as just touching the screen. There's a volume dial, and the back has shoulder buttons. It's a cool design. The shoulder buttons are well designed and they feel nice and clicky. However, the box came with a second set of shoulder buttons and instructions on how to swap them out. Some people say that these were included for cosmetic reasons. If you want the silver shoulder buttons, you can just swap those on. I'm willing to bet that something might have gone wrong here in the manufacturing process. I'm a little more pessimistic about this because I've experienced stuff in the past with devices like this where they include the fix in the box and they put it on you to fix it yourself. I'm willing to bet something went wrong during the manufacturing process, and instead of delaying the release of this, they just decided to put new shoulder buttons in the box. This is just speculation though. They feel fine. I just have not been using it long enough to see if it fails. But if you like fixing things yourself, they included a fix in the box if things were to happen eventually. The screen is a beautiful OLED screen. The only way I could even tell that it's OLED is that it flickers in my footage because I record in 24 frames per second. It could also get very bright, which is another tell that it's OLED. It looks nice, but I probably wouldn't have even guessed that it's OLED. I also noticed that when I was just navigating through Chrome on here, scrolling had a weird jelly effect. So I recorded it in slow motion and my suspicions were correct. It looks like it's a native portrait display. It's updating left to right instead of up and down, which is really strange because the screen is like almost square. They didn't have to design it like that. They could have just rotated it 90 degrees. But it's fine. Everything looks just fine during 60 frames per second gameplay. So it's not a huge deal. This screen is nice and big for retro games, just under 4 inches. It is a really weird aspect ratio and resolution though. It's 1240 by 1080, which is a very bizarre 31 by 27 aspect ratio. This is not the aspect ratio of any device or console that I've ever heard of before. So whatever you play on here will be scaled a little bit weird. My suspicion is that this was just the cheap wholesale OLED screen that they could get for this thing with this size. Although after playing it for a while and getting everything situated on here, I noticed that this weird aspect ratio is in between a lot of the aspect ratios you'd probably want for retro games. So it actually turns out to be pretty cool. So when things scale, you only get some very slight black bars that are well hidden because of the deep OLED black levels. And the screen is a high enough resolution where integer scaling isn't really a big deal anyway. This weird aspect ratio just means that you'll almost certainly have to mess with scaling options every so often. I set most of my retro stuff to 4:3, Game Boy Advance is set to 3:2, and original Game Boy is 10:9. RetroArch did all of this by default, and I think so did Dolphin. The setup process was extremely frustrating. It should be extremely similar to the setup process of the Pocket Micro, which was relatively easy. It's just the Android setup process I've done 1,000 times before. For whatever reason, this time, after connecting to my Wi-Fi, which is like the first step, it tells me my internet's too slow. Okay, rude, but also, it's not. Not even on the device itself. Its connection is fine. I even tried hardwiring the device. It connected, but it still wouldn't update for some reason. I even tried manually updating the device, and only then did I find out your device software is currently up to date. The device was already up to date. Otherwise, setup is fine. The default home screen is easy to navigate with a controller, and it comes with the Aya space, which, after moving your ROMs into the designated folders on the device, does a pretty decent job of laying out all of your systems into easy to navigate folders. But just like the Pocket Micro, this device does not download emulators for you. I would love for them to follow in Retroid's footsteps, where during the setup process, it just suggests emulators for you to download and packages them for you. Although maybe that was there and I just wasn't able to access it because this thing wouldn't update properly. They do suggest emulators for you as you load your ROMs, but the emulators aren't what I would recommend. For example, they want you to download Pizza Boy for Game Boy and Game Boy Advance. I want RetroArch for that stuff. The Aya Space does do a good job of recognizing whatever emulator or core you download and letting you choose between them. So overall, it's not a terrible experience. It's fine. It's just really not set up for beginners. You're gonna have to know your way around an emulation handheld before you get this thing. And you probably will if you're willing to spend $500 for this. The Pocket DMG is powerful, so it can play Game Boy all the way up to GameCube pretty well, and even some pretty hefty Nintendo Switch emulation if you really wanted to. It can pull up to 15 watt TDP, but man, this fan is loud. I would probably leave it in power saving or balance mode most of the time. But for testing these handhelds, I like to leave it in the highest performance mode while I'm doing all of my testing to see what it's truly capable of. And man, it was loud the whole time. You can get away with playing GameCube and PS2 games at a lower power mode, but if it starts to struggle, you might have to be comfortable waking up your neighbors with your brand new jet engine. These are all fan holes all around the device, except for the left and right sides of the screen. Those are the speakers. And even though they don't face you while you're playing, they sound fine, a little muffled, but they're loud enough to cut over most of the fan noise, but the fan noise will still be there. The first thing that I wanted to try was GameCube emulation with Dolphin because I wanted to just cut right to the chase. I downloaded it straight from the Dolphin website, their nightly version. Rogue Squadron is a very processor-intensive game. It's very hard to emulate. It actually performed just fine on here. There was some stuttering while it was compiling shaders. I wouldn't expect this game to perform perfectly, but it performed better than I've seen on even some PCs. So I'd say GameCube performance is actually pretty great on here. I also tried Sunshine and Melee, which I can't really show on here, but they also performed very good. They proved to me that GameCube emulation is great on here. Using the trackpad as a right stick on Super Mario Sunshine was surprisingly more intuitive than I would have expected. It's not perfect, but it was definitely playable. For PS2, you're gonna wanna open the Chrome browser and download some sort of PS2 emulator. Retro Game Core has a pretty good tutorial on how to get Nether SX2 up and running. There's a couple of steps to it. I just found a prepackaged version over on archive.org. Do not download Nether SX2 off of the Google Play Store because it costs $10 and it is not the official version. It's an open source thing, I'm pretty sure, so it's free. You will also need a PS2 BIOS file. PS2 is the only system that I ever emulate that requires a BIOS file, which you can get from a legitimate PlayStation 2, and that's how you get it. For both PS2 and GameCube emulation, you will want to run these emulators by themselves at least once and turn off on-screen controls and map the physical controls manually. Yes, you can map the right stick to swipes on the touchpad. PS2 ran pretty fantastic. I used Burnout Revenge because its fast motion makes it easy to detect frame dips, and also the music makes it easy to detect frame dips, and it ran fantastic. Very similar to the Ein Odin 2 when I played that. It wasn't perfect with a frame dip here or there, but it was damn near close to perfect. For most other retro consoles, you're gonna just want RetroArch. I recommend downloading that from their website as well through the Chrome browser. Then download all the necessary cores. Retro Game Core, of course, also has a tutorial on which RetroArch cores are the best. I like RetroArch because it lets you easily fast forward with the touchscreen. Yeah, baby. Wow! Whoa! Whoa! And like I said before, ISpace will ask you which core you want to run for each system. For Game Boy and Game Boy Color, I use Gambate. It runs great, and by default, it's scaled perfectly. I'll admit, games do look very good on this massive display. If you want shaders or scanline overlays, you'll have to use settings within RetroArch. It's not the most intuitive, but the option is there if you'd like to tinker. If you mess with that enough, you can get this to look like a pretty sick modern Game Boy. Game Boy Advance also looks fantastic. It defaults to 3x2, which looks just fine. Enabling integer scaling scales it down just ever so slightly. I'm not too sure this is necessary though, because the screen is such a high resolution, but there's really not much of a downside to just enabling it. The screen is barely any smaller. For N64, I usually like to use the Mupen dedicated app, but for this, I just used RetroArch, and it was honestly just fine. My biggest issue here was using the trackpad as the C buttons. It's not a great solution for a game like Ocarina of Time, where C buttons work like actual buttons, and it did not feel good in a first-person shooter like Perfect Dark for some reason. I think this trackpad would greatly benefit from having a little dimple that were in the direct center of the trackpad, so your finger knows where home is. Similar to how the F and J keys on a keyboard have a little dimple so your fingers know where to rest. I would drill a dimple or leave a little mark myself, but I don't actually know where the direct center is myself, so I would definitely mess that up. Also, for whatever reason, RetroArch's little on-screen display is way too close to the middle of the screen for N64 games, so I just went into the settings and disabled that. You might want to just do this for all cores. I just like having the on-screen display sometimes for like fast forwarding or accessing the menu easily. For 3DS and Nintendo Switch emulation, you can find the latest builds of Citra and Yuzu if you just look hard enough. You don't really have to look hard at all. 3DS runs fine on here after you give it a good solid few minutes to compile its shaders. For whatever reason, the character models in Shinobi never emulate well. I had to set the controller up. There is an option to toggle the screens with a controller button. I set it to the thumbstick click because nothing else is set to that. Swapping screens like this is not a bad way to play 3DS on a single screen console like this. Although I do wish there was a way to use a little more of this screen real estate. I don't love the Citra display options here. Nintendo Switch was pretty easy to set up. There's an option to auto map controls. All of my dumped games are in folders, so I had to add those one at a time, and those only show up in Yuzu. They don't show up in the Aya space. Sonic Mania runs fine, but you might notice that the colors are inverted for some weird reason. This only happened for Sonic Mania, and I did find the Mesa Turnup GPU drivers, and this fixed the issue. This should also get games to run better, and it did get Mario Odyssey to run better. Before, it had no visuals at all. Now, it does. I can't really show too much of it, sorry. I was getting just under 60 frames the whole time with no mods or anything. It's pretty viable for a Nintendo Switch emulator, so long as you don't mind playing 16:9 games on this small square screen. Its sheer beefiness kind of got me to change my mind on this a little bit. It's kind of an emulation beast. And with this form factor, it's unlike anything else with this amount of power on the market, across the whole handheld market. You're just going to be paying a premium price for this premium power. You can use it for Android games too, of course, but with a square screen, what Android game are you really going to be playing on here? Dead Cells does scale accurately, but everything does become pretty small on here. Zenless Zone Zero actually scales very nice. This square aspect ratio suits it pretty well, just not the menus or the text, which can get pretty small. But I appreciate that some big multi-platform games are designed responsibly like this. Most other Android games are gonna be really small on here and have black bars on the top and bottom. Other little quirks, when you want to exit a game, you press this little side button to exit that console, but it really just kicks you back to the home screen. It honestly feels more intuitive most of the time to just use the touchscreen for most things, even though the touchscreen is small and not great for most things. It also smudges very easily. So there will just always be smudges on your Pocket DMG. The battery life is also not great. You're looking at a maximum of an hour and a half on full power. It also takes a very long time to charge without a fast charger. It only supports up to 25 watts of fast charging, which is still better than the 5 watts from a PC. It can't even charge fast enough to play at 5 watts through a PC. But it doesn't come with a charger, so you're gonna want like a Ugreen fast charger or something to go along with it. And I cannot stress this enough, the fan is insanely loud. Luckily, this device is powerful enough that you can play most things on low power modes. Although I'm on a low power mode now, I've been talking for about 30 minutes and it dropped about 10%. I do have it at full blast brightness though. I had high expectations for this device and they were immediately dropped back down to ground level when I set this thing up and had a really frustrating first day with it. But then I got to play it and now I actually really like it. After getting everything all set up properly, it's the most premium emulation device I have by a long shot. But that premium price tag is hard to justify. $500 is insane for an Android handheld. I do love this form factor, but once you start to reach emulation power beyond that of GameCube, games are gonna look the best at 16:9. So I'm wondering why this is even so powerful. They could have taken the Pocket micro innards and maybe even made a thinner Pocket DMG. Sold it for $300, it would have still been an amazing device. $500 is just a bit of a stretch. I'm looking at it now and there is a version that is 8 gigabytes of RAM and 128 gigabytes of internal storage. That one is $350-ish right now on Indiegogo. So that's a little bit more reasonable. I don't think you really need all of that RAM. Maybe if you really want to play some really tiny Nintendo Switch games. All that power is just a little hard to recommend when there's other devices like the Odin 2 Mini and even the Retroid Pocket 5 that I haven't even been able to try yet. Those are significantly cheaper and the screen is more appropriate for high-powered games. Again, I do love this form factor and I love having a square-ish screen for retro games, but it's just a bit too powerful, especially for an Android handheld. When this was first announced, I was excited because I thought it was gonna be a Windows handheld. That would have been wild. It would have been also very expensive. It would have been like $1,000. But imagine playing PC indie games on a square-ish screen like this. Those would have scaled really good. Android is just a weird little middle area. It's super powerful for an Android handheld, but it's just an Android handheld. I'm starting to think maybe the cheaper option is the better option, although I would have liked to have seen that price go down even more. I'm scratching my head thinking who's gonna want the $500 version. Of course, us emulation people are gonna eat this stuff up, but most people are gonna get one emulation handheld, especially a high-end one, and they're gonna use it for a long time. Most people are not buying every single expensive emulation handheld that comes out. Thank you, Factor. Use code 50YOUHUNGRY. If I had to choose one expensive emulation handheld, it would probably be the Odin 2 Mini. I've been playing that and love it. Although again, I haven't tried the Retroid Pocket 5 yet. I love the design here. That's what drew me to this. And I'm hoping Aya does similar work in the future. I do love it, but I only got it because I can make a video on it. Telling a normal person to get this is a bit of a stretch. $500 for Game Boy games? Come on. What do you guys think about the Aya Neo Pocket DMG? What should I be playing on here? What would look best on here? You know, it is kind of pretty tiny and nice looking. It is, God, I'm like really torn here. It is so nice, but man, you can buy an entire laptop Leave it in the comments below, at me on Twitter, any and all of this other social media garbage. A lot of this stuff was streamed on twitch.tv/wolfden, where the chat helped me out setting this up and mostly gave me the wrong information. Don't forget to check out wolfdenapparel.com, where we got stuff like this shirt and also these coffee cups that I use every single day for my flat whites. And the most important thing you do to help support this channel is, for the love of God, subscribe please, so people will stop saying almost at 1 million to me. And share this video with a friend who is willing to drop $500 on a toy. It's a toy. Thank you very much. Have yourself a very good week.